Hey guys, welcome back to the Electric Bike Lab. So today we're going to be talking about hub motors. Now you might want a hub motor or to put a hub motor on your bike as a conversion kit because hub motors are simple, they're reliable, they're a lot of fun, they're easy to install, they got a lot of great things going for them. They might not have the hill climbing ability of a mid-drive, but hub motors are still really great. But what you might be a little nervous about is all the different components that are involved in installing for your hub motor kit. You have different brake type sensors, throttles, pedal assist sensors. Of course, there's different types of hub motors, direct drive, geared hub. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to show you exactly what will be involved in installing on any type of bike, including yours. So stick around. One of the first considerations with a hub motor conversion kit is deciding whether you want to go with a front or a rear wheel. For front, it's easy because you don't really have many options, but for the rear, there's a couple things to think about. For one, the gear sets. So what type of gear set do you have? There's what's known as a freewheel and a cassette type. They're different gear sets. The freewheel is a threaded type and actually just threads right on to the hub, whereas the cassette type has the freewheel mechanism built into the hub. Generally, higher end bikes are sold with the cassette style and are good up to 12 speeds. Freewheels are generally only good up to about 9 speeds. So a cassette type free body generally will have more gears, and the result will be that the motor will be a little bit wider. So you might have a 142 millimeter dropout, and on a motor like this, it might be as low as 135. So when you're installing the gear set, you're gonna have to pull it off of your old wheel first using a tool, a freewheel removal tool. And like we saw before, you just thread on a freewheel to get it onto the motor. And for your cassette, it's gonna be the same tool to pull it off, but you're gonna have a way to hold the sprocket in place, and then this is just going to slide on. See, as you can see, they are very different systems, and next we'll look at what type of throttle will be most appropriate for you. One of the next things that you want to think about is what type of throttle that you want to use. So generally this is going to be a matter of preference, but also your gear shifter is going to play a big role. So if your gear shifter offers a lot of clearance between the actual shifter and the handlebar, then you could use a twist throttle. And a twist throttle is often enjoyed by people that have a motorcycle background. If you don't have that kind of clearance and it's tighter, or you have a twist style shifter, then a thumb throttle is going to be the better route, and we'll look at that next. So we've already taken the grip off of this, but as you can see with this shifter, because it's a shifter that twists and kind of gets in the way of where a twist throttle would be, the better option on a setup like this is going to be to use a thumb throttle. There are a couple different styles of thumb throttle. These are sort of the ones that have been in use for a long time, and these you have to remove everything off the handlebar before you can slide the throttle on. A new style that's starting to come out and that we're going to be offering is this style, which has a lever that's able to open, so you don't actually have to remove anything from the handlebar. You can just take out this 3mm Allen screw, open it up, and plop it right there on the handlebar, and then you're going to have sort of a trigger action to engage your throttle. So those are your two main options, the twist throttle and the thumb throttle style. One of the features in a conversion kit is to have some type of sensor built into your braking system so that when the brakes are applied, any power going to the motor is going to be cut. There are three different options that we have. We have a replacement brake lever with a built-in sensor, an inline cable sensor, and a magnetic stick-on sensor. In the case of this, where there's not an integrated shifter, it's a bare lever by itself, no shifting attached to it, we have really any option that we want. So what would be most obvious here with a very cheap plastic lever that's not really that nice and we'd be okay to let go, we can replace it with these guys right here, which are a nice alloy with a rubber grip brake lever that have a built-in sensor right here. So when this lever is pulled, there's a switch that goes off that will cut the motor power. That's probably the best option in this case. Another option is going to be a magnetic stick-on sensor. So this is a really popular option if you don't have cables at all, such as in a hydraulic setup. You just put the magnet onto the brake lever, and when the brake lever is pulled, that magnet is going to move far away from the sensor. So the sensor is going to stick onto the brake caliper right here, and it's when the magnet is far enough away, it's going to engage the switch to cut the motor power. So that's your second option, and this is a really easy option and works for almost any setup, very simple. Our last option is what is called an inline cable sensor, and so what that is you actually have to remove your original brake cable. You have to pull it out completely, and then you'll feed the brake cable through this sensor, and it's going to hold on to the cable and it's going to sense movement in the actual brake cable. It's going to sit just like this with a little plastic spacer that's going to go into your lever. So this is a great option if you have shifters that are built in and you don't want to run the magnet. This is really nice, and we're going to show you how to install that. So right now we're going to show you how to install one of these inline cable sensors on your bike. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to loosen the cable right at the actual brake. So you go right down to where your brake ends. There's going to be a Allen bolt here. It's generally going to be a 5mm Allen bolt, and we've already loosened it, but you're going to want to loosen that off, and if you have a little crimp on the end of your cable, you're going to want to cut that off, because we're going to have to unfeed our cable all the way back in order to install this type of sensor. So now that we have our crimp cut and our cable is loose, we're going to feed our cable all the way out. And now that it's out, we're going to install our cable, and be careful because it might be a little bit frayed. Generally we'll provide a brand new cable with these type of sensors. And you're going to feed it into the hole. You're going to allow it to, you can sort of twist it in the way that the cable is wound to make it a little bit easier. We're going to feed it all the way through, and it's going to go right into the plastic spacer. It's going to go right into our small alloy piece right here. And so you want the cable to be going in towards the center of the handlebar, and then you're going to feed this back into your brake cable and back into your brake. And then you're going to just reconnect your brake like normal, and at that point you will have installed the inline cable sensor. Right now we're going to show you what would be involved in installing these on a hydraulic brake system. So it is a little bit tricky because you have to find the sweet spot of the engagement point of the sensor. So as you can see right now, this little symbol, it's a circle with two little triangles on the end of it. That is the brake is engaged sensor symbol. So if we put the magnet really close to the sensor, you can see that that symbol goes away. As we move it away, it comes back. So that is telling us that the brakes are engaged. So what we need to do is place this magnet onto the brake lever so that the sensor is not engaged, and then we have to find the sweet spot for when the brake moves. We need to see that symbol come back. So as you can see, it's a little finicky, and you have to play with it a little bit to really get that right spot. But once you get it, what you want to do is use a little bit of super glue and put some super glue on the magnet and hold it down on the lever. And then these sensors have an adhesive backing, so you'll just peel that adhesive backing and get it in place. Don't press it too tight. You still want to be able to maybe wiggle it around just to get it seated in a nice spot. Like I said, be patient with yourself because this is a bit of a tricky process, and sometimes it's okay just to omit using these levers because they can be so finicky. But you can see right now it's in a sweet spot. It is working when the brake lever is being pulled. So you just want to find that spot, and yeah, that'll allow your brake sensor to work. Let's take a look at how these pedal assist sensors install onto the bike. So first we're going to look at the easiest installation, which would be our two-piece disc with snap ring. So that comes apart, and then you would place the disc on either side and clamp it in place, and then you take your snap ring and place it over top to hold your disc in place. And then once that's nice and firm, you'd take your sensor and you'd install it on the seat tube with a couple of zip ties and make sure that that crosshair is very, very, very close and almost even touching the magnets, so that when you pedal, The pedal is locked right now, but when you pedal, you can see that that magnet disc rotates. So the next type of sensor that we're going to look at is the splined sensor, and so this will only work if your crank actually has those splines on the inside, and that's generally what's found on what's called a sealed cartridge crank. But when you're looking at this, you really want to make sure that you actually have the physical space to go into that spacing between your crank arm and the frame. So as you can see, this is a little bit tight. I mean, it looks like it would just fit in there. This is about 6.5 millimeters wide, as you can see, and we have about 6.5 millimeters of space in the frame here, 6.3. So what you can do is when you take this crank arm off, you can actually grind down the inside to give a little bit of clearance so that when you press this crank arm back on, it's not going to crush the sensor. But we will need to remove the crank arm in order to install this type of sensor. So that type of tool is going to look like this, and it's called a crank arm removal tool, or an extractor, or a puller. So the first thing we'll do is we'll remove this bolt. This is an 8 millimeter Allen. I'll use our impact gun to pop it off. And then we're going to thread this tool inside of the crank arm. You can see there are threads on the outside of the inner portion. Thread this on. You can see you want to thread it in as far as you can, and then once you get there, you're going to tighten the inside, and it's going to pull this crank arm off. And so when that crank arm is removed, we can pull that tool out, and as you can see here, we have these nice splines, and so that's where this ends up being a very clean install. So if this can work, it is worth it, because this is just going to press over top of your crank, and you're going to press it in place until the splines just pop right where they're supposed to, and you can see it's already done. So that's already nicely in place. It's not going to move anywhere. But while we have the crank arm off, we'll also look at the basic type of pedal assist sensor. And once it's off, our basic type of pedal assist sensor is going to use this sensor portion. It's going to go over top, and generally you can epoxy this in place. You can use hot glue and epoxy, so the hot glue will cool down and hold it in place as the epoxy settles, and then after that you can take your disc and install it over top. You notice the arrows on the disc, and you want those to be going in the direction of pedaling. So once that's installed, what's nice about these discs is that they are a little bit thinner than the splined sensor. So if you don't want to grind your crank arm down, if there isn't the room, then these are more universal type of pedal assist sensor. And same thing, you're going to place your crank arm back on, and you're going to throw your bolt back in and tighten it down. And that's a look at how all of our pedal assist sensors go on. And finally, we have what is known as our external BB, or external bottom bracket sensor. So this is if you have an external bottom bracket like this picture right here. So this is going to magnetize to your chain ring on your drive side, and then you're going to install the sensor on your drive side. And so the same thing, when the magnets are passing the sensor, it's going to be engaged. Sometimes you have a 4-bolt pattern on your chain ring, and sometimes you have a 5-bolt pattern. So there's this adapter that will clamp into if you have a 5-ring setup, and then this can pop right onto it. So both instances are accounted for here. Cool. Now we're going to look at installing the battery onto our down tube. So you can see these are the existing water bottle mounts. So when you unscrew your water bottle, you have these 2 retaining bosses that are in place that we are able to screw our base plate into. So if you look at our base plate here, you can see that it's got 4 different mounting points, whereas on this base plate there's only 3. And the reason for this is that this base plate has a built-in controller. So the controller is housed in this area, which does not give it that extra mounting point. And this obviously doesn't have a controller. The battery is more built to have a larger battery. So with this battery base plate, what we would do is we would get it into a nice spot, and then we would take these low profile Allen bolts that we provide with this kit and install them into the holes, and then of course tighten them down and snug them up, and then our battery base plate is going to be nice and tight and in place, and we'll be able to take our battery and slide it onto our base and lock it down. So one issue you might run into is if your down tube is not flat. Like say that you have a round down tube. Well, what we can do in this situation is 3D print you an adapter plate like you see here. So the only thing that we would need to know is the diameter of your tube or the profile of your tube. So as you can see, this one has a 1.25" down tube so that this part can wrap around the down tube and give a nice flat surface for the battery to mount to. Now, what you might run into is in the case of, say, these built-in controller base plates, you'll mount it down intending for the wires to come out the bottom, and you may find that you only have one of the bolts that actually line up with your water bottle mount. So that may or may not be a problem for you. If it works, is we will put a piece of foam at the back of the battery, and then we'll press the battery down, and it will kind of use the foam as a bit of a shock absorber or holder. And then often we can actually get one bolt bolted down and the battery pressing up against this foam to act as a second brace, and that can be quite strong. But if you're uncomfortable with that and you'd rather have 2 or even 3 mounting places for your battery, then what you can do is you can use what's called a riv nut tool and riv nuts. Now this is a riv nut, and this is basically a nut that will go into a hole, and then using a riv nut tool you're able to crush it in place. So this tool, you'll squeeze it and then it will mushroom around the tube, the down tube here, and it will give a nice rigid place to mount your battery, to put a bolt in. You can actually see that these two mounting spots are actually rib nuts already. They've just been painted over. So you'd have to drill a hole or a couple holes into your frame in a very, very precise location. A good way to do that would be to install the first 2 bolts into place and then draw a line with a marker there, just so you know that you're going to be nice and straight. And then you can take a small punching tool and punch a little hole. And in this case, these are M5 riv nuts, and you're going to want to find a drill bit that has about a 7mm diameter, which is going to give it just enough clearance for it to slide in, and then you can lock it down with your riv nut tool. So that is a look at how to install the batteries on the hub motor kits, and yeah, I hope it goes nice and smooth for you. All right, so we're going to pop this old wheel off, and then we're going to take off the freewheel with our freewheel removal tool, install it on the hub motor, pull the old tire off, and then we're going to put some rim tape onto the new motorized wheel, put a little hole for the valve to go through, install the new tire on, and then we're going to inflate it and then throw it onto the frame. So as you can see, we want to have the dropouts except our axle, put our washers on the inside with the flanges hanging out, and then put our other washers and then on our nut finally on the end, and snug them up nice and tight. If you have an aluminum frame, it is recommended to run a torque arm, especially if you have a high power motor, but that is how the motor pops on. Step that we're going to do is we're going to connect all of our connectors. So this is the type of controller. If you have a geared hub motor, 500 watt, and this is our larger 1000 watt controller. So we'll take a look at the 1000 watt first. They are generally the same, but we have our motor connection, then we have our battery connection, we have our rear light connection, pedal assist sensor, and finally our handlebar harness cable. So we'll start with our handlebar harness cable. We'll make sure that we have the arrows lined up, and then we'll press them together nice and tight. So once that's connected, it won't be able to move in anymore. Then we'll take our pedal assist sensor and we will plug that in here to this yellow connector. We'll make sure that's nice and lined up. And that pops in. These are all watertight, waterproof connectors. If you purchased a rear light with your kit, this is where you'll plug in your rear light. And if you purchase your battery from us, we include an XT60 connection, so you can plug that in. And lastly, your motor extension cable is going to plug in here. So this is the larger connector found on our 1000-watt motors. Now let's take a look at this controller. The only difference here is that there is no battery connector because the battery connection is already built in. So this uses the smaller motor cable, which would be found on the geared hub motors. So you can see this would have an extension on it, but that will plug directly in. Again, get the arrows to line up. And then again, you have your pedal assist sensor, your handlebar harness, and your rear light. So if we take a look at our handlebar harness, there are 5 total connections. So the green is going to be for our display. And then we have 2 connectors that are the same, and those are going to be for our brakes. Right here. And then the last one is going to be for our throttle. So our throttle's right here. The last connection is this red one, and this is for if you purchase with your kit is a front headlight. We'll plug in our front headlight. And that's it. Everything just snaps together. Everything's waterproof. It's a very easy wiring process, and that's all there is to it. Thanks for watching.